Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another CW webinar, once again from my home to yours. I'm Vanderson, and me and my team are here to bring you analysis on the building materials industry in the current scenario and its prospects for the medium term. Next slide, please. For today's presentation, I would like to introduce myself, Vanderson Teixeira, Junior Business Analyst at CW Group, as well as my colleague Prashant Singh, our Associate Director. Next slide, please. For today's presentation, our agenda, we will start with an introduction of our company, what it is that we do, what we have to offer, and of course, go through a macroeconomic overview, building materials industry overview, and share prospects for the global building materials industry in the medium term. Next slide, please. CW Group is presented across three distinct verticals: advisory, research, and media. Under our advisory umbrella, we work with major global consultancies and leading institutions, including the World Bank and sovereign wealth funds on projects. We provide consulting and advisory expertise on a diverse product portfolio. And of course, during those challenging times, we have helped multiple industry participants on their decision-making process. This includes projects like feasibility studies in the Horn of Africa, market assessments in South America, and market entry strategies in the Middle East. Under our research umbrella, CW focused on producing syndicated reports. Those reports cover areas like cement, building materials, coal, pet coke, bulk shipping, and also paper and pulp. Although we are well known for our studies on cement demand globally, as well as a detailed industry and country reports. We also provide historical as well as forecasts for markets in a variety of products, including our most famous volume forecast report, trade prices report, white cement report, and much, much more. We also provide commodity price assessments for cement, clinker, as well as pet coke and coal. Under our third umbrella, our media umbrella, by subscribing, we provide online access to our vast database. We also provide newsletters focused on cement, building materials, coal, pet coke, bulk shipping, and also paper and pulp with the latest industry news. We also hold industry-specific meetings called CW Summits, and after our Americas edition in January, we are currently preparing a Europe, North Africa, and Middle East edition in Madrid, but of course later in the year. Next place, please. I would like now to pass the presentation to my colleague Prashant. Thank you so much for your attention.
Hello, everybody, my name is Prashant, and I will now be taking you through some of the macroeconomic overview slides, as well as a brief discussion into the building materials industry. Next slide, please. Okay. So what you're seeing on the slide here is basically a compilation of data from multiple global institutions, including the World Bank. And the global macroeconomic scenario seems progressively getting worse with each passing month, actually passing week, actually, instead of a month. And the outlook has actually soured so much that the IMF had to post a revision of its IMF April 2020 forecast estimate for 2020 and 2021. They revised it considerably down from -3% globally to a contraction of -5%, almost -5%, 4.9 to be exact. So OECD is actually forecasting a contraction considerably worse at 7.6, and in the last couple of weeks, actually, they were even talking about it, the scenario possibly even getting to almost -8%, which is an unheard of figure. And what is important to understand is we're still in the preliminary stages of understanding the overall impact of the pandemic, which in many regions shows no signs of abating, particularly across North America, Asia, whereas Europe has it much more under control at this point in time. Latin America, unfortunately, as a region, was already having a poor economic performance prior to the pandemic, and this pandemic is only going to exacerbate what was already a challenging macroeconomic, social, and political scenario. And possibly sort of condemn the next 5 years of this decade to just playing catch up. India also, in the April version of the IMF, was actually forecasted to be, along with China, one of the two countries out of the G20 that was expected to grow. And now that has also been expected to contract. China was forecasted to grow at around 1%. But if you have been following the news in terms of the severe level of flooding and sort of the level of natural disasters that have been plaguing China, as well as the fact that the Chinese Communist Party has refused to issue an economic target, tells you that it might not be growth might not be actually happening, but whether they will sort of share that with us remains to be seen. In effect, what we see is a long U-shaped recovery is probably the most likely outcome. We are out of the zone where we would have seen a V-shaped recovery. That's not going to happen. So a long U-shaped is perhaps the best outcome we can expect. And if you follow, statements from the U.S. Federal Reserve, we are now looking at a possible sort of timeline, which has been extended to like late 2021 to sort of start seeing a comprehensive recovery globally. And of course, that is contingent upon, a vaccine candidate being found and shared. Next slide, please. This is basically a compilation of the same statistics you saw from a global level at a more regional level. And as you see that what the global economic contraction that we are all going through is the worst certainly since the Great Depression. And the level of economic, social destruction the pandemic has wrought in the first 7 months of this year takes us back way back to like at least 1918 during the Spanish influenza. And if you combine that with the economic damage during the Great Depression, so it's basically a combination of possibly the two worst disasters that have befallen, aside from, of course, the world wars, on a global basis. China, which is a major regional driver in concert with the US and Europe, is facing, its own extremely challenging economic political issues. Some not of its doing, some of its doing. For example, the issue of the imposition of a national security law in Hong Kong, which has changed the status of Hong Kong, will obviously have a negative impact on sort of investment and how foreign companies view China as an investment destination and the safety of their investment. So let us now progress and move on to the buildings material industry. Next slide, please. So in 2019, basically the global buildings material industry was an estimated roughly 2.5 trillion US dollars. And if you take out China, it's roughly 1.7. So China basically is around 30% of the world's building materials industry. And what is important to note is that the buildings material industry is much more aside from just cement or concrete. And in fact, you would classify it across 6 major subdivisions, and including HVAC, plumbing and electrical equipment, which includes a range of manufacturers across refrigeration, heating equipment, boilers, plumbing fixtures, fans, etc. You have a separate category of lighting and wiring. Third is roofing, siding, and other materials. Then we move on to CW specialty, of course, which is cement. You have concrete, minerals, and aggregates, etc. You have another category is glass, windows, doors, and flooring, which includes everything for interior and exterior flooring products. Last but not least, you have construction metals, which include manufacturers of steel and other basic metals and hardware. Just to give you a perspective, in North America in 2016, across these 6 major groupings, plumbing and electrical equipment accounted for 6% of the industry's revenue. Lighting and wiring also accounted for 6%. Roofing, siding, and other materials accounted for 26%, whereas the cement, concrete, and aggregates together accounted for about 23%. Glass and windows about 5%, and the biggest contributor was 33%, which is coming out of construction metals. Something that perhaps we're not all familiar with. The total industry revenue at that point was an estimated 140 billion US dollars. So it's a massive industry and a lot more complex than sort of we all sometimes forget in terms of the multitude of parts that are there. Next slide, please. So this is a small snapshot into some key markets as to what is happening at the present time. And what I would like to do is, I'll start off with the US. You see housing starts that are down year on year by 23%. You see in Brazil, the low level of production in the buildings material industry. There's a lack of supply affecting stores across Brazil, and which is actually leading to price rises because demand has sort of outstripped supply because supply was shut down due to the pandemic. And this actually is happening across the world. And even if it isn't happening, manufacturers are taking advantage of raising prices using the pandemic closures as an opportunity to sort of raise prices. In the US, housing stats are down 23% year on year, but I think the magnitude of the decline will only come visible in the second and third quarters. As you've seen the last couple of months, or actually the last couple of weeks, the pandemic has actually been spreading like wildfire across the US. It's reporting 60, 70, almost 60,000 plus cases a week. So what that impact has on housing stats and construction starts will obviously be shared in a couple of, in a month or two. We'll see the total impact on the economy. Europe was the initial epicenter, bore the brunt, and the outlook for the construction market is grim, to say the least. But Europe has also been able to keep it under control, and there are expectations and hope that by next year, the most major European markets will start to see a recovery. Among the top 5, only Germany is expected to see a small decrease, around 2.5% in construction this year, while all the other major ones, France, Italy, Spain, and the UK, are going to see something on the verge of 12 to 33% contraction. So we're talking about a massive blow, and to get back to these levels will obviously take a long period of time, even if everything were to be fine tomorrow, because the damage is so deep. It's going to take more than just 1 or 2 quarters to repair. Next slide, please. So in late 2019, there was a study in terms of what the outlook would be for major construction markets in 2020. This is obviously prior to the pandemic, and the impact of sort of the global oil price collapse. And North America was apparently looking warm, and Western Europe was looking warm, but all 4, and also Australia, but all other 4 major regional markets were actually already cold, and prospects were not looking bright for 2020 due to a multitude of sort of macroeconomic factors at regional levels. And now, unfortunately, after sort of the first 7 months of this year, all of these markets are now sort of deep in retrenchment. India is extremely sort of negative. The outlook again for this financial year is down at least 5 to 10%. China, despite what you would sort of you see on the news, is facing considerable internal sort of issues, and it would be a miracle to see the construction sector grow as per what they forecast, which is like maybe 5% growth. Overall, that would be a challenge in itself. North America is in the first stages of sort of still the first wave of the pandemic and is in an extremely sort of precarious situation. Latin America and the Caribbean have already crossed a gruesome toll of 150,000 deaths due to the pandemic. And the region is in no place looking stable. And Brazil, which is the leading economy in Latin America, followed by Mexico, is far, far from having this virus in control. And without that being under sort of brought down into manageable levels, we cannot look at a construction sector recovery. Next slide, please. So over the short term, meaning or over the medium term, leaving aside 2020, the forecast for 2021 and 2022 is a lot sort of more positive when you consider what we are going through at this moment. We expect that Western Europe and North America will North and Africa, sorry, will continue to face difficult challenges even in 2021. So the recovery is probably going to sort of manifest itself in like 3rd or 4th quarter 2021, and you will sort of then see it solidify in early 2022. So a long way to go, at least for these markets. China will probably, due to the massive injection that the Chinese government is likely to give to the construction sector as a method of boosting growth and employment will probably come out of this the first or the earliest. And we will, the North America has an election coming up in November, which could sort of lead to interesting changes in policy and perhaps, you know, depending on sort of the final result, a different investment policy and focus on infrastructure. Latin America, as I said previously, is probably going to confront another 5 years of sort of misery just to get back to what it was in 2019. And mind you, 2019 was not that great. So that's putting things into sort of perspective. And it's not because you know, we follow considerably in detail cement markets, and what those numbers are saying is that the impact has been quite severe, and it will continue to sort of percolate through the system because the major driver will now have to be the government, and government funding has sort of government funding regionally, also globally, have been tremendously impacted due to the on-take of new debt that they have had to take on to sort of alleviate the pandemic and the suffering of sort of below poverty line workers. And that will have a substantial restraint on government's ability to fund big sector projects that they were previously committed to. So this will be a challenge over the next years. In this space, the developed markets, because of their ability to attract wealth and due to relatively economic stability, will be better placed because they're still able to raise debt despite having higher debt to GDP ratios than most emerging markets, perhaps with a singular exception of China. Next slide, please. So in terms of the overall outlook, just sort of a description in terms of the major drivers and constraints we see across the building materials industry. Business confidence has sort of weakened considerably just in the past few weeks and months across the world. As I said, sort of the impact of the pandemic, the social and the social impact, the economic impact, the political impact will weigh considerably on government's ability to see how to take on these levels of debt and yet continue progress and big spending programs that are necessary to improve infrastructure and livelihood. The U.S. housing numbers are for the first quarter, actually, when you think about it, not too bad in terms of year on year, but that was prior to sort of the pandemic actually taking a complete hold and a lot of lockdowns that were being imposed. Unfortunately, in the case of the US, actually, a lot of those lockdowns are being reimposed as we speak due to the uncontrolled spread. So those numbers are likely to be quite gloomy. But on a larger and sort of larger trend, when we're looking at sort of CO2 emission cuts and how that's progressing, we see that this is still being embraced despite the challenges across major, all major regions. And that is a positive trend in terms of not only helping to make the industry more cost competitive, reduce its reliance on energy, but also taking into account financial viability, especially in a very tough competitive environment. So this pandemic is actually, perhaps you could say, a blessing in disguise because it's going to force the industry to be as efficient as possible. In terms of the sort of overall capacity, overcapacity in many regions for the construction is just not over. This will have, of course, a lot of, in terms of cement producers, have a lot of impact on utilization rates. And unfortunately, a lot of new capacity was supposed to come online depending upon the stage of the plants being built. Some may be delayed, or some may have to be commissioned, but the utilization rates are going to be extremely low. So those are going to be extremely challenging for those companies in terms of financial viabilities. Another major and unfortunate aspect of the pandemic, not just the pandemic actually, over the last couple of years of global trade policy has been a resurgence in the use of tariffs due to heightened, rising political tensions across the world. And given where we are today, even in the midst of the pandemic, we see a lot of heightened political sort of interference in trade, and this is only likely to get worse, unfortunately. The US and China are already a case in point. Another example of what a new level of digital tariffs could be is what India has done to Chinese apps. It's banned like 59 popular Chinese apps, which has already cost like, in terms of revenues, to tune of a few $100 million. Some estimates put that amount even larger to some of these apps. So this is going to sort of be a major downer, even as the recovery remains strained at this point. But what this means is the green building materials industry has an important opportunity to take advantage of and perhaps reshape the conversation from traditional sources and focus on energy efficiency and bring to forefront the fact that it's more financially viable and cost effective. So at this point, I would like to thank you for your attention. I'm going to pass the baton on back to my colleague Vanderson, who will take you to the last few slides. So Vanderson, please.
Thank you, Prashant. So now moving on, let's discuss some of the similarity and contrasts between building materials and green building materials. Green construction materials not only offer an alternative to traditional construction materials, but they also complement them. And with the advance of environmental awareness, not only companies, but the population increased the consumption of green building materials as an effort to reduce emissions and save costs. On average, green building currently reduces energy used by 30%, carbon emissions by 35%, and water used by 30 to 50%, and generates waste cost savings of 50 to 90%. So, for example, green cement using clay as clinker substitute has been launched as a great alternative as well, since the carbon dioxide emissions of the production process are reduced by 38%, and also in addition, energy consumption is reduced by 30%, which decreases the environmental and production costs. So this is not only financial beneficial to cement producers, but also to the environment. However, in this aspect, green construction materials may also pose a challenge to the industry. Timber, for example, even though it's a very good substitute, has higher production costs due to limited production locations and higher amounts of raw materials required to its production. Next slide, please. Well, now in our closing remarks, the global economic contraction as well as the oil price collapse due to the pandemic has led to an extremely challenging macroeconomic picture globally. This scenario is unfortunately probably going to get worse before it gets better, and the global building materials industry However, it remains better placed than many others to weather the storm due to its essential nature, of course. Along with the green construction, the traditional building materials industry can help shape the path towards a less energy-intensive yet sustainable future for all of us. I would like to thank you for your attention for this webinar, and we invite you all to join us for future webinars whose list can be found in our website, and we'll see you in our next webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.